But my maths teacher gave me some great advice, but as we've gone live, I can't tell you what to do. Welcome to this 4020 live panel. Does anyone listen to the podcast, first of all? Wonderful, no one does. That's great. You've got no idea who we are. Phil Kaplan, editor of 4020 magazine, available now in newsagents and here. Phil, how are you?
Good.
I've been in a car with you all
We've
afternoon.
been given cake, so how could I not be good?
Important question. First thing you taught at journalism school. Paul, how do you pronounce your surname?
I say Rowley, but I really have no preference because obviously many people over the hill say Rowley, but it is Rowley. Really.
I think I got it right. That's all right. Paul, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Yeah, really good.
How much are you enjoying the World Cup so far?
Yeah, I've enjoyed it, particularly these last rounds, obviously, where it's. I mean, the last two games obviously have been. How could anybody not enjoy the last two games? So, yeah, enjoyed it. I've enjoyed the flavour in the early rounds and all the excitement and up and coming nations, if you like. I think that's been nice to see, and then obviously the intensity and the absolute quality in the last two games have been great.
I can tell you, we're in Stockport, and we've got a fantastic audience. What's going on? What's it?
What's what?
I thought you were pointing at us.
No, I was saying, he said, does anybody not enjoy the last two games?
Oh, okay.
The result was wrong.
Yes.
Very like, I've got to say, if you know, they've brought us cake, they've brought us biscuits. I don't want to say Stockport's the best library we've been to, stress balls, but
Pens.
so what we've got? We've still got to go to Doncaster, we've got to Hull
Widnes.
and Widnes. So raise your games. We want more free things. We like Andrew Voss, but on a bit of a budget. He's got hats everywhere he's gone. John and beer. Don't tell him about beer. George Clark, our great export to Australia. They've allowed you back. Have you enjoyed the World Cup so far?
I've enjoyed it. I could have done with one of these stress balls on Saturday when I was rewriting my match report and then rewriting it again, and then rewriting it again, and then looked and saw Stephen Crichton drop a field goal and break England's hearts. But apart from that, it has been fun. It's been good. Weather's a bit different to Sydney at this time of year. Getting dark at 4 o'clock, so it's good to be home.
Enjoy the fog?
Yeah, it's good.
Were you at York yesterday?
Yeah.
Could you see the other end of the pitch? I was watching on TV, so I missed all the drama.
Yeah, it was. The more concern was driving home at night. It's like having to go at 40 and just crawling all the way along the A64.
Yeah.
See, good motorway knowledge. But yeah, it was fine. It's not the reason we lost, anyway.
Have you grown since you left it?
Yeah, because I've been eating all that
I
cake.
don't remember you being that tall anyway.
Well, maybe Paul will give me a gig next year. You know.
Well, yeah, I was just going to say maybe you shrunk, Phil.
No, that's true. That's what it is. Yeah. But if you're looking for a big forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm a halfback trapped.
No, you're
trapped
not.
in a.
Trapped in a
He doesn't like drizzle and fog, so that's the problem.
Yeah.
Looking forward to asking Matt Parrish searching questions on Thursday at the pre-final press conference.
I'm more concerned. Oh, no. It's part of the job. It'll be fine. If they win, it might be a different story.
And finally, a man who's got to find something to do on Sunday.
Yep.
Chris Brindley, chair of the Rugby League World Cup 2021. How much can you enjoy it? Can you enjoy it at this point?
Our responsibility is to deliver the tournament. It's the coach's responsibility to deliver the results. So we've probably got the slightly less pressurised job. So whilst, as a proud Englishman, it hurt like hell on Saturday, for the chair of the board of the organising committee to have two semi-finals that we've had. Everyone told me on Friday night that was one of the best games of rugby league ever seen in the world, and there's no way it'll be beaten tomorrow. And what happens on the Saturday, you have a Golden Point semi-final for the first time in Rugby League World Cup history. So the viewing figures were at 1.4, 1.5 million until full time, and then jumped up to 2.4, 2.5 million in Golden Point. And I had some family at Twickenham, and they weren't watching the rugby union. Everybody was watching the Golden Point bit. So, as the tournament organiser, we have to be neutral. But as an Englishman, yeah, it did hurt.
As a neutral tournament organiser, then, is it a disappointment that neither England's men nor women have made the doubleheader on Saturday?
As a tournament organiser, we've looked at the fact that there's 5 different nations out of 6 potential Samoa getting there is great for World Rugby. It shows that there's more nations competing. Australia, New Zealand for the women was probably always going to be the final. And you could say the same for France, England for the wheelchair. So as tournament organiser, would it have been nice? Home nations should be competitive and get there. We would have had more eyeballs on the game, I think. But ultimately, we've got the 6 finalists and we've got some of the best teams in the world at the 3 disciplines competing, and that's good for the tournament.
And when you first made that decision to wrap up the men's, women's and wheelchair tournaments, did you ever imagine or expect the interest in the 2 which are not the men's tournament?
That's why we did it. We were really clear that we knew what we had ahead of us in terms of organisation. It's not easy, but the reality is having the ability to watch a rugby league game almost every single night, whether it's men's, women or wheelchair, has just been fantastic for the sport. And I think by the end of Saturday night, we'll have had 30 million viewers watching 61 games. That's unheralded for any country in any rugby league. So it was absolutely the right decision. One of our 4 values is bold and brave. And we were bold and we were brave, and sometimes fortune favours the bold, and I believe it has done this time.
Phil doesn't know what he's going to do after Sunday, do you? Or after Saturday?
Sleep. For a little while. I think the other thing is we need to talk about the adversity that you, as an organising group, have overcome, because it isn't just having to delay it by a year. It's the fact that we changed the royalty, we changed the Prime Minister 3 times, we changed the people you were dealing with in government, or you lost staff, which was understandable. Nobody's had to cope with that in a previous World Cup, and to come up with figures like 30 million, and obviously wheelchair is the water cooler sport, that's the one everybody's talking about. That's got to be a success, hasn't it?
Oh, a huge success. Every bump in the road I think we've hit. The great news is we've got an outstanding team led by John Dutton. John Dutton, and I've worked in many businesses. John Dutton's the most outstanding CEO I've ever had the privilege to work with. And when people say, what will you miss come Sunday? I'll miss working with John. Calm under pressure, very thoughtful. He always looks for solutions, not problems. And we've had lots of challenges. I think it's 5 prime ministers, 2 monarchs, 7 chancellors of the Exchequer, countless sports ministers, and different people in the Department of Digital, Culture, Media and Sport that we've had to work with. So it felt like we've always been explaining what the vision is, how we're trying to do it, what support we need, why we need it. And I think there's only 3 tournaments been postponed because of a pandemic. And I think they're being played. I think we've seen the Women's Rugby Union World Cup. I think we've seen the T20 World Cup just take place in Australia, and ourselves. So we've got through a pandemic, we've got through Brexit, we've got through a load of challenges, and we wanted to play in 2021. Let's not have any sort of qualms about that, because we had a window where there was no other tournament globally going on. To move it to 2022 meant in this country alone, we were competing with the Women's Euros, and that had a lot of positive press. You've got the 2 weeks of the Birmingham Commonwealth Games, we've got the World Gymnastics Championships, and we even had to move the tournament a week because we've got the FIFA World Cup in Qatar. So all of those, and because there was a postponement, we were obliged to offer refunds, and over £1 million of refunds were made last year, a lot of which I've not rebought, because if you looked at all the economic indicators last October in 2021, base rate 0.1%, now it's 3 point something. You know, cost of fuel, cost of energy, you look at sort of all those inflation, 3.1, now it's 10.1. So I can understand there's been a challenge for people with disposable income. So we've had lots of challenges, and I was saying to you earlier, Phil, even the passing of the monarch disrupted one of our key plans, because we weren't going to try and do the marketing of tickets against the Commonwealth Games, because that was the tournament that was on the TV. So we decided to look at the first week in September. Kids were back at school. The grand final playoffs are going, so we'd set up a really cool marketing campaign, TV adverts, ready to go live, Friday the 9th of September. Monarch passes on the 8th. There's no TV adverts, there's no sport. We go through an official period of mourning. So that was just another one of those setbacks. But you know what? We'll have broken the record for eyeballs, attendances, social impact, 25.8 million invested in local clubs throughout the north. So despite the adversity, you know what, we've come through it, and that's testimony to the team, and in particular, I'd say John Dutton, Stephen Brown, Lucy Jones, Dean Hardman, Mick Hogan. They've just been absolutely superb. We lost 60 staff because we postponed on the 4th of August 2021, and everybody was expecting to have finished the job in November 2021, and they all started getting jobs with Commonwealth Games, Women's Euros, World Gymnastics Championships. So we've had to retrain a lot of staff and renegotiate a lot of deals, but we're really proud of what we've done.
Before I move on, quick question, because of everything you've mentioned about monarchs and prime ministers and such, do you know who's going to be presenting the cups at the weekend? Or have you still got to make that decision? Leave it until Friday afternoon.
Well, we know who we've planned to do it, but we've planned lots of things and it never quite works out. So we have a plan. We have a plan for Friday night, we have a plan for the women's tournament Saturday and the men's tournament Saturday. So we have a plan.
Paul, are you around on Saturday just in case?
I'm there, yeah.
Just give me a mobile, Paul, just in case.
How, you know, coming into this World Cup, we're all excited about it. As a coach of a Super League side, are you able to, have you got any budget left to pick up any bargains? Maybe you've seen something during this World Cup, you think, going to the chairman, the chief executive and saying, this is the guy who can lead us to further glory or something?
No, not at our club is a simple answer to that. However, I think the days of getting bargains from the World Cup have kind of disappeared really. You've got to be looking really deep because it's stacked, isn't it, with NRL Super League players. You know, you're not finding much raw talent in there. It's pretty well, you know, well experienced and well rounded, the talent on show. So no, regarding us, I was saying to Phil earlier, I think we had a record 13 players represent throughout the World Cup. So our club's been really proud and really supportive of all them players. Quite detrimental to our pre-season, so it's doing my stress levels. These stress balls are coming in handy, but because you know a few of them, 5 I think, will only be due back after Christmas now, so we'll get probably a 3-week pre-season before friendlies. So, however, our club and the remaining players have been really proud of all the representation. So across many different nations, and obviously we've got a couple of bodies in the Samoan team now to finish it off with Tim Laffey and Ken Seo. So yeah, we're looking forward to the weekend, and I guess we'll have to support Samoa at the weekend.
I mean, it's a difficult choice.
You
Isn't it? I don't know, anyone supporting Australia in here at the weekend? No, it's difficult. It's difficult. We're all Samoan. I mean, Lee Radford's now the most popular Englishman in Samoa.
Yeah.
Which is really, only he said he might get a sleeve tattoo this week, so the pressure's on him.
I sat with him last night, so he wasn't aware of that. He was thinking he was the most hated man at the weekend in England, because obviously Samoa turned over England. But yeah, I sat with the coaching camp for an hour or two last night, and yeah, they're all very welcoming, very nice. So they're chilled bunch, I'll give them that. But I think the nature of them as people and obviously their undoubted ability makes them a really dangerous opposition for Australia. So I think it's quite an exciting final to look forward to.
It is one where everyone's going to expect. I mean, Australia were the massive favourites before the tournament even kicked off, and before the draw was made, and before the tournament was even announced as happening in 2021 or 2022. How can Samoa beat Australia?
Well, to be fair, I think New Zealand did a pretty good job, and these two gents here will be bemoaning that fact that probably one of the tries of Aussies were to try, because there was an hand on, ball carrying hand down, you know, the one I'm on about. So, and what New Zealand did is they probably played more rugby in that game than any of the previous games. They had a crack at it by playing rugby. I think Australia are a team that, if you want to just go one out, which a lot of the earlier rounds were very low risk play from a lot of teams, Australia are too good to just be troubled like that. So I think even against Lebanon, you've seen Dewey there running the big halfback for Lebanon. He actually took Australia on and ran at them with shape inside and out. and he dented the line a few times. So probably set a little bit of a blueprint that, just one out carries against Australia won't work. You know, play a little bit of rugby, but Samoa did that against England, so maybe England were maybe guilty of expecting, because everyone talks about the physical battle and the physical prowess of Samoa when they was preparing for the England game, but they played rugby, Samoa. They played rugby and they got England on the edges a little bit. The first set of the second half was a right to left shift, churned up at 40 metres. Next one's quick, good kick, 100 metres first set. So maybe double bluffed England a little bit with that one, and I think they've got to continue doing that because, they're flamboyant, they've got a little bit of flair, and they're powerful as well, aren't they, with Suali there in particular popping up in and around. I mean, how damaging is he as a 19-year-old kid? He's an absolutely unbelievable talent, isn't he? And I guess Manu as well, he's the same, he's not quite as young, but we've definitely seen some talent, and he's right up there.
Where are the 19-year-olds coming through in England, Phil? Where are they?
Well, we've got him.
We just don't have a competition that can prepare them in the same way, and I think that's one of the things that we've talked about all the way through this trip, that the legacy isn't just what you do off the field, it's how you then prepare your domestic competition to be competitive on the field. And the next World Cup is only 3 years away, so it doesn't give you a lot. But you look at the England men's team and perhaps even a little bit at the top end of the women's team, and there are some players that we already know will not now be playing in 2025. Done a fantastic job to get the team to where it is, but it's time now for the next generation to be blooded. So we need to find our Harry Newman's. He probably is the nearest that we've got, maybe at that kind of age.
Wellesby's there as well. Wellesby's only.
Oh yeah, Wellesby is now an established England international. We just need to play him in the right position.
Yeah.
But there are others. It's just that we need to stop them playing 40 games a year before they get to a World Cup.
How many of them are going to see what Dom Young and Herbie Farnworth have done? Gone chance their arm at 17, 18, 19, and there are obviously deficiencies in both their games and they're still learning. But if you're a Super League coach now, how do you get a kid to stay when he might be tempted to just go, well, if it doesn't work out, I can always come back here?
Difficult, and I would suggest that if they got the opportunity, I don't think there's many that would turn it down. I think they would go, is the simple answer to that. It's not going to harm the international game, but obviously we want our stars in our domestic competition as well, week in, week out. So that's a budget, and the budget obviously is a reflection of the size of the game over here. So the two come hand in hand, don't they? And so at this moment in time, we really can't stop them because there's money to be made in Australia, and they can be set up for life, whilst also, like you've done, living in a bit of sunshine as well is quite
I don't get
appealing.
paid as well as them.
Well, don't know, that's the rumour, I don't know, that's what Phil said you do.
We had to put cake on just to get there.
Yeah.
That was part of my rider, part of my condition.
So there must be more money in rugby league journalism in Australia than there is in the UK. Sure.
Yeah, well, there are full-time jobs, whereas I can't think there's many guys who are actually full-time dedicated here, which is probably an indication of what Paul said about the size of the sport. And, you know, England winning and maybe winning a World Cup and having a Bobby Moore moment would have changed all that. But
I'm not sure it would, because we're having the same conversations now that we've had after the last two World Cups. 2013 arguably was, up until that point, the best World Cup we'd had. I think this might overtake it, and I'm not saying that just because you're here. I just think there's been...
Biggest, best and most inclusive.
No, well,
There you go. You
no,
know the line.
I just
Yeah.
think what this has had that the others haven't is that women and wheelchair aspect to it. And I think Friday night is going to be exceptional.
Oh, yeah.
And I think in terms of eyeballs and where even a club like Salford, who's forming a wheelchair team on the back of that, I think that's where the growth of the sport is. But we had a great tournament in 2013. We didn't do anything with it. You know, people are still saying, when are we taking a game to Bristol on the back of 2013? We never did. 2017, we got to a World Cup final. We came back and still our best players were playing in the NRL. We were still screaming for international competition. We haven't had that calendar yet. John Keir was saying in Perth in 2017 about Northern Hemisphere Rugby League, exactly what he said when Wales went out this time. So I'm not sure there's a legacy value on the field. I think there's potential to have it off the field. But no, I think more players will go down under, and actually it's enhanced the England too much.
I think we're getting more inclusive, but I'm not sure we're growing.
Yeah.
We're more inclusive, but we're not getting bigger. The attention's not getting bigger, and I'm a believer that until you get a better geographical spread, how can you really grow it? Because ultimately, you only have to travel 10 miles up the road to Liverpool, and they won't know there's a game on at the weekend. So that's quite amazing, really. You know, it is a small area of interest.
I do think IMG coming in has recognised that.
Yeah.
And I think the fact that, I mean, George, you know better than I would, having a World Club Challenge, which has almost come out of the blue. We were told that after the grand final here, it won't happen. It might happen in a couple of years. All of a sudden now, somebody behind the scenes is saying there's a commodity here. And suddenly, Penrith are welcoming St Helens, St George are playing them as well. That might be IMG influence. That might also be coming on the back of a World Cup where people are now realising that there is value in international rugby league. That's the area you would hope would be pushed post the World Cup. We know we're stuck with the season format for 2023. Still too many games. We've been told that Magic's going, that Luke fixtures are going, but we have to keep them this year because season tickets were already on sale. If that starts to happen and there are more international windows, tours start being announced, let's build up to a World Cup that's only 3 years away, that's near enough now for us to have a fingerprint on.
Yeah.
The Northern Hemisphere might make a bit of a comeback, but I just think that World Cup Challenge is quite an interesting development.
I wonder whether that's more to do with the fact the NRL's got 17 teams next year and they need a pre-season football for television, and 17 Saints can be 18.
Yeah.
I wonder if it's more to do with that. So, but yeah, I think that's kind of, and it comes back to the point, you know, you've just talked about Luke fixtures and stuff. You tell people in Australia that the season goes on for what? I don't know, when did you start round one this year? February?
Second week of February.
And finished?
Oh, jeez.
Hopefully at Old Trafford.
14th of October. 14th of October.
Yeah,
Yeah.
14th of October. So.
That's a crazy amount of time to be playing the sport.
With double games in there as well, weekend
Yeah.
Easter fixtures, so like
Thursday
I think we
night.
played something like 4 games in 16 days at one point, you know, so that weren't the easiest, to be honest.
And you wouldn't be able to do that in Australia because the players are in a union, and the
Yeah.
union turn around and say, well, you can't give us this many 5-day turnarounds. And it kind of protects the players and also ensures that the product's good. You know, you don't have it's increased with the 6-again rule, but maybe in the past you have very few kind of 70, you know, big blowouts, because they always say the 3rd game of the Easter weekend, or the one after,
It's the fatigue.
is the fatigue game.
It's not even so much the blowouts, it's the quality of the matches. You're
Yeah,
trying to
yeah,
sell, you know, tickets at 25 quid a head, but you're not seeing the superstars, and those who are able to play are not being able to play at the moment. The fact that England have got to the semi-finals of the men's and the women's on the back of that domestic schedule is actually something we should be quite proud of, heartbroken though we are that they're not playing at Old Trafford. Have we really seen anything that we weren't expecting? I don't think, you know, the duress that our players are under in normal circumstances to make a competitive semi-final is about what we expected.
What you do is you force a choice, don't you? Some certain players might want operations or rest, so there's a choice, operation or rest equals career or a World Cup, so they're forced to make a choice, aren't they? Well, really should never make a choice because playing for your country is the highest accolade you'll ever get. However, feeding your family is the most important thing you'll ever do. So a career or a World Cup, when you get to that older age, it's a choice, isn't it, at the end of the day?
You mentioned crowds and Luke fixtures as well, just coming back to domestically. How many times would you have played Warrington Wigan this year? And how difficult is it then if you're working in marketing to be like, oh, you've got to come watch this game this week, but you can also come see it in 4 weeks' time and 4 weeks after that. So, or you can go away to watch it. So that's the other thing, you've got to create scarcity, and then people will be like, I've got to get a ticket to be at that game.
I think Phil said it earlier, that for me is the job of IMG now. I don't believe the game has been marketed to its potential, and we've tried to do it in-house, you know, the Rugby League family. This is IMG's moment, and I think they've been given 2 free passes. They've been given wheelchair, they've been given the opportunity of women's, you know, the viewing figures for last night have come through. 1.2 million people watched England women. You know, and that's the highest Rugby League audience to watch any women. That's Australia, Gillaroos, that's State of Origin women. Last night's was the world record. So IMG got the opportunity. I just wish that I'd almost had another year, a year ago, to get ready for this moment. And that's about seeking the right level of investment. You know, if I was a broadcaster now, I'd be wanting wheelchair rugby league. I'd be wanting that as part of a package. So, you know, I'd be looking at Channel 4 maybe, getting Adam Hills to front it, and suddenly you've got your Channel 4 games, your Super League, and you'd have a wheelchair game in and around that. We should be looking for a home for wheelchair rugby league. You know, we should be looking at maybe at the Etihad, or we should be looking at the England Institute of Sport where we played some of the group games. And we should be really getting that out there so people can watch a range of rugby league games. Because I think once you watch one, you'd want to go and watch another and then watch the other. So I think you could create that. That's a job of IMG. You know, for me, that's why they've got a long contract. And it'll be interesting to see what their next iteration is in terms of detail and how they're going to take the game and the number of teams in Super League, the number of fixtures. Yeah, I think we've got to really think about that. Otherwise, we'll keep getting to World Cups and we'll still have fatigue, or we'll go 7 years since we've played the Kangaroos at men's level. It's just nonsense. We should be going there. They should be coming here. You know, now we've got other nations now from the Pacific Islands. We should be having 14 tournaments up here now. We should get back to having home nations and stuff like that. We should work out whether nines is a thing or not. And you know, those are the discussions I think we should do. Because of course club owners want revenue. I get that. They put a lot of money in. They want to do it. But I think the way of we'll just have as many 13-a-side fixtures as we can, and we'll do it with Luke fixtures. I just think it's pretty old thinking. I think fans want something different. As I say, that's the job of IMG.
Do you think the thing with Samoa, I mean, Newcastle was 45,000,
yeah.
Emirates was 40.
Yeah.
It's essentially a new nation that all of a sudden 90,000 people turn up and watch.
Yeah.
Like that's something that you would think that, you know, straight after Sunday, the RFL say, oh, you know, and we're bringing Samoa here next year. We're playing a 3-game series. There's a bit of spice, a bit of hate. And then you think, well, that was a great game. I went to both games. They were great. Yeah. I'll buy a ticket.
Yeah. And I'd add Tonga to that mix. I went to Warrington to watch the quarterfinals of Tonga, Samoa. Yeah. Even before a ball was kicked, I'd have happily parted with a load of money to watch the Scimitar. You know, you just sit there and wow, that was theatre. People go and pay hundreds of quid to watch the opera. You go watch that. Go get the YouTube of that. There's millions of views on Instagram. And then the game went bad. Right? It was absolutely brilliant. So I think it isn't about international rugby. It's not just a domestic game. I think the two can really complement each other. So the job of the RFL and the IRL is to get that international calendar firmed up and actually give the marketing teams the opportunity to go out there and sell something that is a value product that people are prepared to want to go to, and we have a demand for tickets.
I got to see the Ferns on Saturday.
Yes.
One of you was last time.
No? You.
No.
Oh, sorry, I thought you said, did I see this?
Oh, no. Are you going to watch them on Saturday?
Oh, yes.
Are they going to beat Australia?
Could do.
We've got to have some positivity because we can't have Australia win.
Well, I'm a man. I've been over here for so long that I haven't seen much of women's rugby league, and the way that the English were talking about the English team yesterday, I thought New Zealand was second choice to win it. And it was only in the second half when someone said, weren't you in the team that got thrashed by New Zealand last time? And I thought, and again, the people that were talking about the English players were wanting them to win, and they weren't talking about the game that was in front of them. So
I'm off camera so people can't see if I'm nodding or I'm trying to be diplomatic.
The group game between Australia and New Zealand was one hell of a great game. So, you know, I think it's going to be another great game. I think New Zealand absolutely took it to the Jillaroos. So I'm expecting a really, really close contest on Saturday.
We had an amazing 2-day spill last week when we were at York for that Australia-New Zealand game, which was always going to be great. France Cook Islands before, which was a spectacle. I'm a big fan of Cook Islands now. And the day before, England beating Papua New Guinea, crowd loved it, kids everywhere screaming and shouting. But we're never going to stop talking about Canada versus Brazil, are we? Which, when it was drawn, you think, well, what's this going to be? And it turns out to be just an amazing fixture, colour everywhere, great finish. Disappointment for Brazil, but what a thing to remember from this World Cup.
I think that goes back to what Paul was saying about we've effectively had 2 tournaments. The first one was introducing new nations to the competition. Now, Brazil much as the Jamaican men were, particularly the Greece men, and I would throw in the USA wheelchair team as well, that there is unlimited potential, but there's something joyous. I mean, I'm not going to speak for everyone around the table, but we've been following the league for a long time, all of us, and we probably are caught up in some of the cynicism that is in the DNA of the sport. You watch the Brazilians who have been playing it for 5 minutes and love it for what it is, and suddenly you realise why you fell in love with the game. And that's something that I think Chris and I spoke about the other day, that people are saying they have fallen back in love with the sport, and if the World Cup has done nothing else, that's a bonus. But that game in particular summed up why the early part of the tournament was so important. We now know Edna Santini. I'm a big fan. I won the Brazil shirt with 22 on the back. Her interception try was again like the Jamaican try in the men's game. Was one of the joyous moments of the tournament. When that finished, we've been really privileged to see some incredible competitive matches as the tournament has moved on into its knockout phase. And what's interesting is some people in the early stages of the game said the margins are too big, it's therefore not enjoyable. The biggest margin has been in the wheelchair, but that's where everybody said there's been the most enjoyment. And I think what the wheelchair has done is built us up to, we can talk about the men's and women's finals, but the one that excites me the most, because there is a genuine rivalry and animosity between the two nations, is England and France in the wheelchair on Friday night. And everything that we've witnessed live in Sheffield has cemented that feeling that it had to be an England-France final. And keeping them apart was genius, and them both making the decider on Friday night in Manchester in front of what will be a record wheelchair crowd could be the spectacle of the weekend. And I think moments like that mean the World Cup, as it should, has overshadowed domestic competition, and we need to take the stars of the World Cup as much as we can into the domestic competition, and then look forward to building them up again in 3 years' time. But no, you're right, we've been very lucky with what we've seen, and it hasn't been the obvious moments, but for me the best one is still to come.
When we as the tournament organisers just take moments like that. When Brazil played their first game against England, the first interchange, the Brazilian player just ran on and jumped in the arms of a teammate because she'd realised she was playing in a World Cup. And sometimes we forget what playing in a World Cup means. Paul talks about playing for your country being the pinnacle. Of course it is. Playing for your country in a World Cup is the pinnacle. Playing for your country in a World Cup and a World Cup final or a semi-final, all of that's pinnacle stuff. These were the Brazilians. My favourite moment of the Brazilians is not on the pitch. We did the women's launch at the Hospitium in York, and it's autumn, and there's leaves that have fallen down all on the ground. The Brazilians have never seen leaves. So they all ran and picked the leaves up and threw them in the air, just like we would have done, 50 years ago, 60 years ago in my case. And I was kicking leaves around. It was just wonderful that, they were in York, the history of that city. York hosted 4 teams, and people were just blown away by it. And then you sit there and realise that when the Orchids made the debut in Australia in 2017, they lost all the games. And suddenly now, the Papua New Guinea women, right, forget the score from last night, they were in the semi-final of the World Cup. You look at the Cook Islands, and suddenly they're bringing their version of their haka, the women's game. It was just such an amazing cultural experience, as well as seeing emerging nations. Now, I was stood next to Levi Roots, right, at Leigh Sports Village. I never thought I'd be doing that in my life, right? And he's punching the air, right, as Jamaica go over for that try. And you sit there and, he's not a rugby league man, but he's a Jamaican, and therefore, the Reggae Warriors being as part of the tournament, there's just some great stories. But let's not forget when Tonga made their international debut, they got pumped. And suddenly now, they've been in a semi-final in 2017 and a hard-fought quarter-final in 2022. So that's what the World Cup does. It just brings lots of stories. And we've made lots of history along the way as well. So, again, it's, you look back and immense pride. Friday is just going to be rocket fuel. Not only have we got the best 2 teams in the world, you look at some of the players, right? There are people who've never heard of Jack Brown before, but I tell you what, they've heard of him now. He comes off the bench and scores 8 tries and then goes back off. you know, to save himself already. He's just what he can do with a wheelchair. He's unbelievable. The athleticism, the courage, and the fact that we're playing it in a purpose-built arena, right? Manchester Central, where we'll put the TV cameras fixed first so we get the best action shots. Then we'll put the seats around it. And then, you know, we'll have a floor that is a clean floor. I just think we're setting something up to just be the most amazing TV, spectacular, as well as to be there in the audience with lighting, with music. I just think it's just going to be so special that people will be talking about that right through Saturday. No matter what happens at Old Trafford, people will still be talking about wheelchair as well.
Phil, you want that haunting band though, do you? They're playing the tenor, you don't like it.
Oh, the Matador music.
Yeah.
You don't like that?
And it's always played at the most inappropriate
You
moment.
get all the crowd go, hey! So, I think you're the only one.
We can do that.
They're the next
It's a minor quibble.
We wouldn't be rugby league if we didn't have, you know, issues about something. Paul, have you watched much of the wheelchair game? Do you fancy a go?
I don't fancy it goes too aggressive, I'll be honest. And like you said, was it Brown? What's his name?
Jack Brown.
Jack Brown, yeah, 8 tries and he dismantled Wales, didn't he? It was an amazing performance. So yeah, I watched that. I've watched a few. My first experience, I watched Leeds and Halifax, I think, in the final. And I switched it on. I was absolutely gripped. And I think I texted the Halifax Panthers chairman at the times, like getting a bit of banter going. I was getting so much into it as an ex-Halifax lad there, so I was supporting them. But yeah, I think from that moment, I was pretty gripped. So yeah, every opportunity I get, I switch on. I was going to ask before, who's the favourites, by the way, in France and England?
France are ranked marginally ahead of England, but England have won the last 2 test matches against France. But the last World Cup final, which was won by France in Birmingham, they scored with 2 minutes to go, and then England had a try disallowed in extra time, which just rankled with them for 5 years.
So would you say England have got the speed and French a bit more size? The big guy threw the long ball for that try was amazing.
Yeah,
pass, wasn't it? You know,
Pass the tournament, that, yeah.
Unbelievable.
Well,
from one side to the other, wasn't it?
The other guy to watch who plays for England is Seth Bashara, who
Yeah.
this afternoon has been awarded the Golden Boot. But he plays his club rugby in France with most of those players.
Yeah.
He's already said he's getting under their skin. So there is some genuine animosity between the two nations.
Well, we know that, don't we?
I think it's too close to call. Yeah, genuinely, I could see another
The other
Emirates
great
moment.
thing is that England have a head coach who's 26 and a captain who's 22. So we were talking about, you know, legacy and moving on to the next one. They've built a very young team. So if they can win it this time, then clearly it will give them a massive boost going into another World Cup in France.
It's interesting listening to the tactics, isn't it? Where how they, you know, which way they turn the chairs and how they do it together to make sure that the spacing stays the same in the defensive line. And so the tactical side of it is really interesting and well thought. And you know, it's a serious sport, isn't it? It's really good. It's really good.
I think what it does is what people who've seen it for the first time really appreciate. It respects the integrity of rugby league.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's still a set of 6, still moving it backwards, you still have a conversion, still move the ball forward, versus other formats of any wheelchair game. Sometimes there's a bit of a hybrid. And what pleased us, again, as the organiser, you look at that Welsh team, there's 2 women playing.
Yeah.
Right? And you sit there and go, wow, you know, the Australia squad had a father and son. You know, it is the most inclusive sport in the world.
France will have an uncle and nephew.
Yeah.
And the England-Ireland game, Dad was on one side,
Yeah.
Son was on the other.
And Jack Brown, who is arguably the best player in the world, although Bashara is now the Golden Boot winner, he only got into it because he's able-bodied, but his brother is disabled, and they could play together.
Yeah.
And that's how he got started.
He's quick though, eh?
And his brother is now basketball.
Yeah.
Rapid.
It's just, and he's got vision.
Yeah.
He's not just. I keep looking at reruns of it because I'm sure his wheelchair shrinks, goes through a gap, then gets a bit like a cartoon, and you just got that. You blink and go, how did he do that? And some of the ability to lift their arm up and reach over. And I've seen, you know, some of the games where they've gone straight for the defence, going, I know I'm going to hit you, I'm going to hit you hard, I know I'm going to go in the air, but as long as I land the ball over the line, I've scored a try. And, you know, people see the collision and they hear the noise and they go, you just hear it all together, and it's metal on metal. Right? And I've seen others watch it through the fingers, but can't get enough of it. I'm just thrilled at what it's done for getting more eyeballs on the sport.
And the Australians aren't dominating it, are they?
No, but they are dominating everything else, fortunately, for everyone.
Okay, what went wrong for England on Saturday?
The coach is here, you'd have to ask him. But in my opinion, I don't know why they seemed, from where I was sat in the ground, and you've got to remember I'm typing a lot, but it seemed like they kicked behind Samoa a lot. I don't know kind of why. I think maybe the other thing was Samoa weren't the team that they were
4 weeks ago, anyway.
and I don't know how much that played into their heads, and the fact that Samoa had just come off a really tight game with Tonga, and England had just come off basically, they got a bit of resistance in the second half from PNG. I don't know how much that undercut them. And the other thing for me was probably a lack of variation from the bench. When Samoa lost New Brown to concussion, they had Harris Tavita, who's playing every week it becomes his last game before he goes on a hiatus. England really didn't have any variation, I didn't feel, and the only thing we kind of went to was moving Bateman to centre and McMeekin to back row, and Bradley played at hooker for a short period, and when he's just done 40 minutes tackling blokes in the middle, that probably catches up with you. And then the other thing I think is almost the fact that a lot of those guys that played State of Origin in that Samoa team, they are used to playing right until the final minute, and just little lapses maybe from England is what cost them. So,
Am I being unfair in asking what went wrong for England? Should I be giving all the praise to Samoa?
Well, some of it, yeah. If you're going to put 10p in me, I'll be going in for 10 minutes. So
That's fine.
I think we'd have all picked different teams, if we all, but that's nature of the beast. So I wouldn't say who or what, but I'd have done something a little bit different personally. You all would, I know that. So, and then I just thought Samoa learned tactically. They've learned a lot from that first game. We know that they were half drunk first game. We all understand that. There's no dramas there. However, England were fantastic. And I thought going into that, England was probably the form team of the entire competition, not seeing any frailties. But one thing they hadn't had to do is kick out of yardage, because they made so many metres. So we've not seen anything out of yardage. I don't believe they've got too much range there with Wellesby and Williams at pivots. Not having a running hooker in there enabled them to Samoa to put pressure on from Marcus. So they were, if I were coaching against England, I'd be saying front load all your energy down in yardage, because coming out of yardage is something they've not had to do. And then I also think in the first game, I thought Chris Hill and Callum Watkins did a great job at getting Danny Levi, and a lot of England's good work came on the back of their quick rucks. I thought they were going to do the same thing. They were going for Noah Brown until they knocked him out. So they did too good of a job because they knocked him out. He got off the field, and is it Tavita Harris? Tavita, which way around?
Harris to Tavita Harris.
I think he was the unsung hero of the game, because he's a tall lad. I think he did 46 tackles, and he just shut everything down in terms of ruck momentum for England. I thought England still tried to shift on slow ruck, and that was the difference from the first game to that game. And Samoa again learned. They got Bayer in defence. Tim Laffey, my boy on the left edge, shut that down. And England's best work came in around Milford. I thought when they went down to 12 men, England still employed that early kick, which has been successful for not only in the Samoan game. They scored off a Wellesby kick early. They, I think, did against France as well. Obviously, pointed out that Suwali is probably not Suwali, I'm not sure the pronunciation, but his positioning sometimes can be a little bit off, as brilliant as he is, so they've gone for that option. But I just think they should have gassed him a little bit more, because we've seen under pressure, under sustained pressure, set for set, Samoa, the big fellas there, can struggle getting around the corner, and because England got them time and time again on them short sides. Last time, so on the keep go, so don't get too technical here, but I just thought they learned a little bit more. I thought they were more adaptable, so they learned on the move, and I thought England weren't adaptable, so I don't think they learned lessons on the move enough. And it's a tough one. I thought Samoa were brilliant. I thought England weren't at the best, and nobody can ever doubt the commitment, courage. They got off the canvas a few times there, England, didn't they? So that was the drama. They created the drama by getting up off the canvas, but you know they didn't put they weren't the best version of themselves, and that's when it hurts a little bit more, I think.
I think that's the difference with the women as well, that we know that watching that game last night, I'm not sure the women could have given any more. It was just that they were beaten by a physically more dominant team who play in a level of competition predominantly that is higher than the standard that the English women play. And they came off the pitch equally as distraught as the men, but could hold their heads up and say, I'm not sure we could have done any more. I reckon that, you know, without going into incidents that may or may not have happened in a hotel afterwards, England's men will have been incredibly frustrated because they could have done more. The most astonishing period for me was goal one extra time.
Yeah.
Because as you say, England had done so well to get it back to 26 all. You thought the momentum will be with them if they can come up with a couple of really good sets at the start of goal one. And it was arguably the worst I've ever seen a team play.
Yeah. It was messy, weren't it, that period.
And I think something that George said as well, which applies as much to the Australia-New Zealand game the night before, is if you play Origin, you have got a mentality that most people can't match. So New Zealand were great on Friday night, but when it really came down to the last 20 minutes, you could see which team played Origin regularly and which players didn't, because Australia had that ability to shut the game down for the last 20 minutes. We're ahead, we know exactly what we need to do. We don't need to do anything other than we do every week in our domestic competition at a higher level in Origin. So everything you throw at us, I think we can handle. And you got the impression that enough of the Samoans could do that, and the New Zealand women could do that as well.
Australia's game plan was to outwork New Zealand. That's what the game plan was, and then they did a 15-minute period where they relentlessly kicked. And that period where Samoa were down to 12, England should have replicated that period. Full set, kick, tackle, and just gassed New Zealand. That 15-minute period, whatever it was awesome from Australia. And the clip with Smith when he was basically looked like he'd had 15 pints, didn't he? Yeah. The first tackle he'll get you, the second time he'll get you, the third time he's gone. And Australia just scored what seemed a simple try, but in effect, it wasn't simple. What it was is it was just a great example of the discipline and repetition that Australia, through playing the state of origin and the competition that they played, and the mentality that's been enforced since 2016 Four Nations from Mal's tenure. They've built everything on hard work and character, and so they've outworked New Zealand there. They've got them in the end, and that's the philosophy. And they did get them in the end. I don't use the word lucky because they're not lucky. They mastered their own destiny there through that hard work, but they're so disciplined, and ultimately what they do is they do things to a consistently high standard for longer periods of time than any other team over many, many years. So I thought New Zealand were unlucky though because they played some good rugby, and we can go back to that try that it was a harsh one. But.
And they needed Mulitalo out there for that last 10 minutes as well, because he was offering something different. And by the end of the game, because of that relentlessness of Australia, they didn't have the attacking options that perhaps they would have done with him as an outlet. So they were unfortunate.
The other one at training last week at Kangaroos training, they were getting other players to run in the position of Asafa Solomona and Smith. And it's ironic what you were saying is that those were the two players that Cameron Murray ran at, and I think it was the first tackle on that set. And it was so basic, but it's because they'd done so much they planned it all week to take the sting out of those two guys, because they knew that New Zealand was such a powerful team down the middle.
I think Samoa took a little bit of a leaf out of that book with Mickey Mack.
Yeah.
He's going to belt it first time, so go again, and then go again, and they get you in the end, don't they? And I think they did a decent job there in and around that middle. So go back to what you said, maybe an option to replace with a fresh.
Could I say something about the kicking game?
Oh, who's kicking game? England's.
Everybody's kicking game.
Yeah.
They get to the fifth tackle and they kick it right down to the end and get it far away. The number of times I've seen people line up, the men are going forward, with no one just behind. So if they just get a little kick over to one side or the other, they've got their men coming through, they'll have two or three. If someone catches it, they've got one on one side, one on the other, they can score the try.
Yeah, that's the problem is it's about the discipline of Australia, isn't it? And so that would be perceived as a risk, wouldn't it? Because if they do turn and
Well,
catch it,
you're
they
there
give
to
away
win the
field
game,
position.
you've got to take risks to win the game.
I
The-
think
the
when you're
other-
talking to a guy whose team played more, take more risk than anybody else. So.
And the other thing about this kicking is that whenever the fifth tackle comes up, the wingers go back.
Yeah.
And you see 5 against 3 on one side and 5 against 3 on the other. I've seen no one so far pass the ball out to the wings. Because they've got extra
Unless you've
men.
got Josh Adokar, in which case you can chip.
1 minute's there. Let's be there.
Well, how good was that try?
Actually, the first Australia try was the Adam Carr one, and that obviously wasn't a pass, but they realised that the Kiwi wingers had dropped so deep, so they said, well, we'll kick it. Oh, he was out of position rather.
That was a tremendous try, but it came out of the blue. They hadn't done much else.
Yeah, well,
before
because
that.
they was on the right edge,
Yeah.
the Kiwi right winger had tucked fullbacks on sideline so they'd come across, so there was a lot of space out there, but still, the accuracy of that kick,
Well,
and the
it's
speed of Adam Carr. Well, I'm not sure which one's best, but I mean, that was some try,
Yeah.
wasn't it? You
And it
know?
came out of the blue, and that gave them
Yeah, but the kick should have been to the right corner in that 10 metre by 10 metre square,
well,
and then
that's
they
what's
belted
been
it.
happening, and nothing's been happening.
Yeah.
He does a kick to the side.
Well, it has been happening. It's not been scoring, but it's definitely 1,000 cuts.
Yeah.
Australia got you in the end, so they won.
Well, you've already talked about one thing.
Intense games, we need more of them. We keep mentioning Origin. I'm not going to even mention what people keep saying, but how would you bring in more intense games into the men's game in this country?
Well, I just think, and I'll say this because we had 13 people represented, I think there should be reward for clubs for players playing representation. So the text that it makes more buying from clubs, because ultimately in this country I think the club sometimes is valued more than the country or the representation, whether that be Lancashire, All Stars, Colin, whatever it is. If there's a financial reward for them clubs, it might just be a little bit more forthcoming on saying, oh no, you're playing, don't have yeah, you might have a bruise, but you're good. And so I think if it was worthwhile, because ultimately clubs, like you just spoke about all the economic difficulties. Well, clubs are having economic difficulties. Everybody's struggling. So why would a club want to forfeit and risk their prize assets for a mid-season competition, if you like a state of origin? However, if there's financial reward, you get the best players, and I know you're referring to Lancashire, Yorkshire, and I think that's good. I like Lancashire, Yorkshire. Well, then you get your best players, and it becomes a worthwhile project, doesn't it? And you can get to see and get to try and emulate what Australia have done over many years. But and you can grow it. We just never give it a chance, and we've never really backed it, have we? Really, let's be honest. It's always been a half-hearted attempt. But that's the truth of the matter. And why is it an half-hearted attempt? Because club is valued more than representative for country or county. That's my thoughts.
I'd always thought Yorkshire, Lancashire was a bit of a kind of a dated concept, in that the game wanted to be more kind of, appealing to all people from everywhere in the country. But I'm with Paul in that, having lived in Australia for the last 4 years, you see the intensity of the rivalry and what it does to people, where a game is decided on one decision. How many Super League games are decided on one decision? Or, well, I suppose it's more elite level, but it breeds that kind of intensity. So bring it back, but then go to Channel 4 and say, well, here's a new TV commodity, and sell it differently to the existing Sky deal. And then, you obviously need, it helps when people are allowed to throw punches, because that's it's built the folklore.
Is this
and
back in
the
hotels,
hate.
or are we on the
No,
pitch?
on the field. But the refs in Origin kind of let anything go, and it's kind of been
Which
able
has
to
been
build
the
the
same
mystique.
in the
World
World
Cup.
Cup, and has been not anything go, because I think there is a genuine responsibility for where we are with HIAs, but there's been a leniency in
You're
the
saying
World
there's been
Cup,
common sense.
and we've just enjoyed it, haven't we?
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
there's been physical
Took away the
confrontation.
frustration of the
Yeah.
fans,
Yeah.
is what you're saying. But
Well,
you mentioned about a valid international calendar. Well, Lancashire, Yorkshire should lead into that. They pick Australia via origin, don't they?
Yeah.
Now, if you aren't playing, if them things come in, if you aren't putting yourself forward for Lancashire and Yorkshire, then you can forget England as well. Like, you've got to put reward there as well as jeopardy. And there's too much jeopardy in them mid-season games at the minute for the clubs. There's not enough reward.
It goes right back to what George said and we said earlier. IMG have to go out and sell Rugby League.
Yeah.
And they've got to sell a set of assets. But the assets have got to be agreed by us what's good for the game. So if that's Lancashire, Yorkshire, that's Lancashire, Yorkshire. Let's go get hold of the broadcaster. You know, Viaplay have now taken over Premier Sports, so suddenly you'd have a conversation with them because Premier Sports were really pleased with the Championship deal. Channel 4 have renewed for 2023. So there's a bit more competition around for Sky now. Sky might have to pay a little bit more. Or there's, you know, the Amazon Primes of this world and Facebook Lives and all of that stuff. We've just got to make sure that our assets are of real good value. And we've got to have some new assets to get new broadcasters to say, yeah, I'll invest in that and see how it goes. That's what we need. And that's how you pay the clubs, Paul.
I think just going back to the return of physical rugby league, that Tonga Samoa game had as much physicality as anything we've seen in recent years, but it didn't extend to head-high tackles. So I think the balance was right in that game, that you can have physicality still in modern rugby. So anybody who says it isn't what it was, no, it isn't. But would you want to watch anything more than that? I think the other thing about Lancashire and Yorkshire is I'm not sure that fits with you saying we need to expand the profile of the game. I think if you made it East and West, and the French players could play for the East, and you know, West was London as well as, you know, players born in the South. I think it's a new commodity. I think we can't sell it along the lines of Lancashire and Yorkshire because that failed for a reason.
I'm not sure I'd have the French, you know, because you want it to be a feeder for your England.
Well, you might if there were English players playing in France.
But you said French players.
Well,
that's
players who play in France.
No, who's changed it now?
Well,
so yeah,
but I
no,
think
Rugby
it's
League
French
will not
players,
change it.
because we want to improve the French game as well, don't we?
yeah, but
So
we
maybe
want
you
to
could.
feed England. That's
You
the
want a
pathway.
physical
That's the
element.
reward.
But East and West or something, a new concept other than Yorkshire and Lancashire, I think that's sellable. But you have to lessen the domestic season.
But is it sellable because I want to watch Yorkshire beat Lancashire?
Yeah, but that's because you're from Yorkshire and you.
Or vice versa. But I would turn
why
off
did
East
Yorkshire
v West.
Lancashire fail? Because Yorkshire took it seriously and nobody really thought Lancashire was a viable option. Because there's something about, with all due respect to the fact that we're in Stockport, Yorkshire is an identity
Manchester
and Lancashire
Metropolitan.
isn't as much. It's Greater Manchester, it's Merseyside, it's sort of lost that red rose tag.
You're now
I'm
our,
not sure about that.
you're our bodyguard on the front
No,
right.
He's the first coach.
People stop watching because Yorkshire won every time, because people like Peter Fox could go into a dressing room and talk about what Yorkshireness was, and Lancashire could never match that. And in the end, when it finished, not only were Yorkshire winning every game, but nobody was turning up to watch them.
No chance. I'm not having that. No chance. We have Yorkshire players drive over the boundary every day, and there's banter straight from the minute, straight from as soon as they get in. So we recognise we're Lancashire.
You know what it's like.
Exactly. So I'm in there. I'm an imposter. I've seen what it's like on the other side. I know how they, I know they feel sorry for it.
Well, you need to find Lancashireness.
But it's also great in terms of building up the kind of the head-to-head, right? Because if let's say, for example, Samoa do come over here in 23, I'm not saying they are, but come in at the end, you know, Callum Watkins playing at centre, he will be Lancashire, right? And then there's someone like, I don't know, a Jake Connor who misses out. He's then saying, you know, I want to prove to Wayne that he has to pick me on this Samoa, and it's great because then they're going at it.
And it's the mate against mate thing as well, which we miss.
But it goes back to how do you market a product, right? We might sit there and say Lancashire didn't take it seriously, but the one thing I think the World Cup's grabbed the imagination is we've gone out there and shown people what wheelchair looks like, what women's looks like. We've got clips where we're using social media well, so people are actually texting each other. That opening game against Australia from the Copper Box, people were texting each other, going, I'm watching Rugby League, wheelchair Rugby League, and guess what, you need to watch it, and you see the peak audience just rise like that. So you have to market a Lancashire game, and that's how you then would sit there and say, yeah, we take it seriously, because you create this thing that says we are tribal. It is Lancashire, it's Yorkshire. We go back to the War of the Roses in 1453 or whatever it was, right? And you could do the Yorkshire take it serious, Lancashire don't. People like Paul get upset, and then we go, right, I'm making sure you play. Before you know it, you've got this state of origin mentality where actually it matters more than playing for your country, right? And everybody wants to watch it. That's how they get eyeballs on it. So, but marketing has a point, and that's IMG's job. Keep going back to it. Why did we sign a 12-year contract? Because they've got the opportunity to take our sport to a new level. Fingers crossed, based on, the biggest, best, most inclusive World Cup we've ever seen. That's the big challenge for IMG.
I'm still trying to get my head around this notion of Yorkshireness and what it is.
You have to be born there.
I was.
There's no such thing.
I'm as English as Don Young, I'm from Wakefield.
There's a ridiculous phrase, adopted Yorkshire. There is no such thing. You are either
No, we sent Michael Vaughan back.
God's county or you're not.
Also, as someone whose grandfather was from St Helens but born in Huddersfield, who do I qualify for? But that's the great thing. You can
Well, if
get
you
into
must wait the grandfather work for the other.
Eligibility rules.
Yeah.
We can have some fun with that as well. Then.
Brown said you walk like a duck, you talk like a duck, you're a duck. So you're from Huddersfield.
But I'm Manchester born and bred, so I'm a Lancashire. But we haven't got that. I think, Phil, you've got something. You are right. We sort of do it, but they do it better. Yorkshire, whenever there's an Olympics on, there's always a league table of where Yorkshire would finish if they were a nation. Right? And I think they worked out it was 8th in the last Olympics. That's the bit I think you mean, which is that level of Yorkshireness, that identity, right? Which is that mentality, and they do it. I walk across, and I've got mates in Yorkshire, but boy, do they let me know where I live, where I come from. And you almost want to do the, I won't mind taking you on and giving you good stuff.
Think the other option is England against England nights. So you've got the incumbent England players and you've got those that would like to knock them off, and you've still got then your mate against mate. You've still got
Yes, enough, because it's not a realistic pathway to England.
It's
You
the
nail
pathway
it.
to the
You
next
need
thing.
Callum playing against Connor.
Yeah.
But they could do
And the
that.
best one's going to get picked.
Could do that with England and England nights.
But England nights is seen as a second team.
No, that's something we need to change.
Well, then that's a different product, though.
But we need new products. We need
No,
products.
but you need an England nights because that's the pathway.
Yeah.
So this is different.
But you want people in that pathway to knock off the ones that are already
Yeah,
at the top
but
of
the
that.
pathway is not level with the England team. So you want something that's level, fighting for that.
I mean,
The Knights can split into Lancashire and Yorkshire to fight for that.
We spent 8 years on this programme not wanting to bring back Yorkshire and Lancashire. Now you're talking us into it.
I'm not even bothered. I do. I just like to create a conversation.
But where would the London players play?
Well,
No players born in London. So Mike McMeekin, who's from Basingstoke, would he play for Yorkshire?
I'm not sure. I've not thought that deep into it. But
No, but I think,
But
we
isn't
need
that-
to have a concept where
isn't that the
it's
debate?
It's inclusive.
that's the debate. So
Yeah.
do those two suggestions, Lancashire, Yorkshire, England nights, do they have to be mutually exclusive?
No.
What if you've had 6 representative games of different variations that actually just brought a level of intensity more than yet another loop fixture of a Super League game? And that's how you might spread it out. If you pay the clubs, then suddenly you get the TV. We just got to think
And I
really
think
different
that's the
about our
problem with
sport.
Magic Weekend, and it doesn't give you intensity. It's just another fixture that skews the league table, and that's what we need to get on.
So what I'm going to sell to IMG now, because obviously I've come up with this idea in my head right now, is on Channel 4 for this Yorkshire-Lancashire thing, we have the selectors of the teams debating who's in the squad on telly.
X Factor.
Yeah.
Golden
Put the pictures around there.
Aussie for years have been making themselves stronger by having these Origin series, because they play each other 3 times every year. New Zealand is the closest country to them, and they hardly ever play test matches against them. They ignore New Zealand, they play themselves, and they make themselves stronger.
And Australians play
actually,
with
Michael
themselves.
Maguire said that on Friday. He said the Australian players won that game because they were used to playing at a greater level of intensity.
Well, it's a greater level because they won't let other countries in to play them.
But what's
It's test
interesting
matches
is
and
Samoa
series.
making the final, because the Pacific now becomes an area where we really need to look after. Now, Tonga broke the mould, and Samoa have stepped into it. If we're seriously talking about taking the next World Cup after France to the Pacific Islands, which would predominantly around New Zealand, but you could see a game played in PNG, maybe one in Apia, you know, depending on how Samoa do, can you imagine what that would be like if they, you know, you take them again? I think if we're serious about that, we have to have a test schedule in place whereby more nations are playing each other before that World Cup, and I think there is a willingness now to try and do that.
I'm willing to cover any games in Fiji if anybody
Cook Islands.
I want to go to Cook Islands. Everyone's told me it's beautiful, and it's in the middle of nowhere. And one of them's called Danger Island, but they renamed it. I mean, why would you rename something called Danger Island?
And they've got an international airport.
Yeah.
Auckland.
But that's a bit me. So we are, coming towards the end of this programme. We're coming towards the end of the World Cup, Chris. What has been what's your impression of it so far? Because there's been some negativity, and if I don't mention negativity, people will get upset and say, I'm not doing my job right. Empty seats, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
As a whole, I mean, I guess you can't really say whether this World Cup's been a success or a failure or whatever in between until it's finished on Saturday.
No, I'll tell you now, it's a success. Absolutely roaring success. Let's look at the evidence. Biggest number of TV audience in any World Cup ever played, 14 million. We're up to 25 now. We've got 3 games to go. We've seen the biggest ever audience of any women's game anywhere in the world. We've seen the biggest men's audience of any international rugby game ever in the world. You look at £25.8 million invested in local community clubs like Portobello Vine and Cramlington Rockets and, you know, Salford Roosters. So that's before a ball was kicked, caught or thrown. Attendances, let's not forget, this is compared to 2013, which showed 7 live games. We made the decision to work with BBC, and I think BBC deserve a huge amount of credit. We will have shown all 61 games live for this World Cup, all 61. And you're talking about the majority of them being on BBC One or BBC Two. Go count the number of FIFA World Cup games on BBC, and you'll find that more games of Rugby League World Cup 2021 will be shown than FIFA World Cup games on the BBC. They're the facts. They're indisputable facts. If you look at the attendances, I remember getting a load of grief the first game at Warrington. Crowd was 5,500. And everybody piles in with we had 10,000 in 2013. You did. And there was 5,500 in 2021. Subtle difference. There was 480,000 people watching that game on the BBC. So either you can sit there and say it was 5,500, or you can sit there and say it was 485,500. Our job wasn't just to fill the stadium. Our job was to get more eyeballs looking at the game of Rugby League in this country than ever before. We've done that. And my background is finance. If you look at all the economic indicators for 2021, every one of them has gone backwards in terms of disposable income. So just imagine I had spent 20 quid on a ticket, and it's cold and it's wet, and I've come in late from work, and I'm reminded that it's on BBC. I might just not use my ticket. We gave away a lot of tickets to key workers, various other people. Some people haven't used those tickets. So I know there's been empty seats, but the tickets have been issued. So would I have wanted every stadium to be sold out? Absolutely. But the reality is, there's no evidence to suggest even if you give tickets away, you get full stadia or bigger audiences. The 2 lowest attendances we've had in this World Cup were at games where the prices were the lowest. And again, let's look at the evidence. 80% of tickets are £50 or less. You can take a family of 4 to a World Cup game for under £25. We've had children's tickets on sale, £2.21. I don't think there's any rugby union fans watching. Might be, there might not be. But try buying a Six Nations ticket or an Autumn International ticket for less than 50 quid at Twickenham. You can't. This is a World Cup. It's the biggest, the best, the most inclusive. We've flown over almost 700 people, the majority of which have come through the Southern Hemisphere. Funny enough, flights have gone up since the pandemic. Hotel accommodation has gone up since the pandemic. We're the first World Cup ever to award prize money to wheelchair and women. We're the first World Cup ever to give participation fees to wheelchair and women. If anybody wants to come and have a private chat with me and says, this isn't the biggest, the best, the most inclusive, and it's not been successful, I'll happily have the chat, because all the evidence points to it's there. And the number of people watching it, I think is testimony to the job that John Dutton and his team's done. I think we've put the World Cup right up there, and I think the sport of Rugby League, the fact that we've now got a Rugby League commercial, which has seen Super League and the RFL merging to make a commercial entity, the fact that IMG have signed up for 12 years, then we've delivered a pretty special World Cup. I think the game's in a pretty decent state. What we've got to do is make sure that that all filters through to the domestic game, and also one of the big things that John Dutton and the Rugby League World Cup Board are committed to is making sure that France 2025 has the best chance possible of being a better World Cup than this one. Because if it is, that means the game's moving forward.
That's what they said at the end of every Olympics. The president of the IOC comes on and says, this has been the best Olympics ever. Apart from, I think, was it Brazil where he didn't say that? Or China? I can't remember. Because it had been rubbish.
Atlanta
Was it Atlanta? Well, Atlanta was.
96, yeah.
But how will France go, do you think? How are you leaving the Rugby League World Cup as a concept for the French?
We have got, at the end of this week, a 2-day observer programme where we've got lots of people from different tournaments that are coming up right throughout the world, and we're going to spend 2 days, and the French contingent have put in a big team to sit and do that. We've already had two sessions with France 2025. They're going for a bigger World Cup than we have. And for me, I applaud that. They're looking at a Youth World Cup as well. So we will want to make them to be successful. Otherwise, it'll just be a tournament that people say in isolation it was a good one. No. The next one should be better, and the next one should be better. We'll do everything we can to make that happen.
We always ask the big questions on this programme. I'm looking at film because he knows what I'm going to ask. Last week we asked Grace Field about her socks, because apparently people collect women's rugby players' socks. We don't know why. After the World Cup finishes, what happens to all the big flags and stuff? Where do they all go?
Oh, there's lots of community clubs and various other organisations that have already put in their bids, and we're happy to share them.
I'm looking forward to seeing the Cook Islands flag just somewhere randomly, like Normanton or something.
And for people in the room, I brought some World Cup badges for you. There you go.
Trying to buy this
Feel well, I could have done that at the start.
Well, yeah,
you accused me that. I did it at the end. So I've answered the questions.
On the legacy, and you're probably not going to be able to answer it, but clearly the profit from the World Cup that is guaranteed to the IRL has never been announced how much that is, and obviously what they can do with future international programmes and calendars will be contingent upon the amount of money that's raised from this tournament. How much is it?
That would be really unfair and wrong.
Write it down.
To talk about.
But is it a significant enough amount to enable them between now and the next World Cup to put in a proper international calendar?
You'd have to ask them that. I know the amount I've already sent, and I know the amount I'll send at the end. It's significant. It's their decision how they choose to spend that, but I know it's a significant amount of money.
So for the people who think this World Cup might make a loss, that's not the case.
We will pay the rights fee to the IRL, and we'll agree and agree the figures with government, and it'll all do very well, thanks.
It's the internet people, you know what the internet people are like. Before I ask the audience for questions, Phil, who's going to win all the World Cups?
We were nearly right.
What, when we said England's going to win everything?
No, we said New Zealand would win the men's. Not quite, but they got close. I do suspect that the Nous of Australia will probably see them win on Saturday. We did say that the Gillaroos would win. We did say England would win the wheelchair, so I'm sticking by those two.
Oh, totally agree. Aussies, England.
Do you allow you back into Australia, for God's sake?
I actually got a sneaky feeling about the Kiwi Ferns. I think they might knock Australia off with their power. Australia in the men, and then England in the wheelchair.
It would be great if the Ferns won.
Yeah.
It'd be hilarious. Are you allowed to make a prediction?
No.
You have to remain neutral.
Oh, absolutely neutral.
When we were in Newcastle on the day before the tournament, I think it's because I'd fallen off the stage and bashed my head. I'd said England were going to win everything. Well, that was a bit of a stupid thing to say, wasn't it? Because I never thought we'd win the Women's World Cup. But there was not a knock on the women's team.
Put that down to concussion.
Didn't go for
Yeah,
HIA,
HIA.
did I? Yeah. But there's also win the wheelchair one. And then, you know, Rugby League can be the winner for the games on Saturday.
We need to ask Paul a question as well before you throw it.
Go on then, because I don't know what the question is.
You mentioned marketing. We need to do more.
I never said that.
Well, somebody did.
I never said that.
Oh, marketing expert, Paul Rowe.
All right, George, but you were the pin-up person for Super League when it started.
Yeah.
You were beef on the bar. Why have we never done anything like that since?
You just can't get the product these days. This was the ball I used to cover it up.
But how good was that when Super League started to see
Yeah, I mean,
posters of you in most northern towns and cities?
I enjoyed it. We were everywhere, buses, billboards in London, Manchester. So, but you know what? They chopped the head off, didn't they?
Well, now is the time to tell everybody it was you.
No, it was. I told them at the time. Don't worry, I stood underneath them all the time. It's me, but they cut the head off. They'd have had to pay me more apparently for my head. So,
So it wasn't the head that they wanted.
No, it wasn't the head, unfortunately. It was,
But isn't that how we should sell
uh,
players? You've got some fantastic players.
beef is back on the bone. It was,
Yeah.
it was the BSC, wasn't it? The mad cow disease. Wasn't it?
Yes.
So, yeah.
But you've got some great young players at Salford.
Yeah.
Do we promote them enough?
No, and it's a really fine line, isn't it? Because we pride ourselves as a sport that we're very approachable, and you know, and the lads are down to earth, and you know, we'll turn up at a birthday party or whatever it is. But then there's a fine line between keeping them not touchable and creating these stars. So it is a fine line, and we don't make them stars, but I guess the lads themselves was so down to earth that I don't know. I actually don't know the answer, but we certainly need to promote our because they are stars and they are athletes, and they're serious athletes as well. So I think the more we put them on that pedestal, the more they might not act like prima donnas and start diving and stuff, but they'll fit into the role, and there are a lot of good role models out there, fantastic role models in Rugby League, and we probably don't shout enough about them.
I think right there, Paul. If people talk about the Women of Steel documentary, just getting that insight that, you know, these are women that they're not professionals, they've got jobs, they've got families, and they play rugby league. If you look at other sports, and they keep going back to IMG, you know, they do behind the scenes documentaries. I reckon our sport would take off to another level if people saw training, if they saw what they eat. But if they see them, you know, one of our values of the World Cup was authentic. You know, rugby league is the authentic sport. You can park and anywhere, and the players will always sign autographs. For me, one of the features of this World Cup has been, as the game finished, you know, all the players have just gone and signed balls for kids. Lulai was the last one off, I think, on Saturday at the Emirates. You know, and he's just there, he's having selfies, and the women last night didn't do a lap of honour. Just all went and just talked to different people in the ground. It'll be friends, it'll be family. That's what's beautiful about our sport. We've just got to capture that on film and get it out to the audience that realise.
Toronto, wasn't it? When you were there, part of the appeal was that fans couldn't believe that they could have a drink with the players afterwards.
Yeah, in the middle of a city, full of millennials, a cheap day out, but then they couldn't. Yeah, like I said, they couldn't get their head around that players will walk around and speak to them basically, and you know, and then the boys would get on the bikes, pedal through the city centre with like the equivalent of Times Square, so the boys' faces and scoring tries on the big towers. Like, they were absolute stars over there. They were absolute big time stars, and the fans just like, hey, Wolfpack, riding along on the bikes and stuff. So down to earth lads, that, you know, they'll retain that, but yeah, they deserve more. I always feel that, you know, our athletes deserve more.
Good.
At all levels, you know, like you said, women, men as well, because I think, and people presume that they're all these well paid, but there's some really, you know, there's lads on 20 grand there who have just suddenly been thrust into this environment, get beat up for a living. And say it's a choice, but you get beat up for a living, and then, like I just did, put the tag of role model on them as well, when you know, it's a lot to live up to. You know, and there's a lot of pressure on young men's shoulders quite often. So, yeah, hopefully the sport keeps growing and the rewards come with it for all the athletes.
Good when the fans go and make the players in the hotels, isn't it? All the players. Audience, have you got any questions?
Well, I've got a comment about when you're talking about who was going to win or what have you. When there were 16 teams in the competition for this year, you knew it was going to be Australia, New Zealand, England and someone else. And that someone else has actually come through, got beaten by 60 points, come back, beaten and got into the final. Lebanon, didn't know they actually had rugby league there, you know. It's great to see all these countries come through.
But what a great story Lebanon is, right? So you talk about Chika, right? Who is, you know, in rugby union, he's taken Australia to the Rugby Union World Cup final, and it was just great telling people a story, perhaps who weren't aware of his involvement in Lebanon. Going, he's at Headingley on a Friday night, getting Lebanon ready for a World Cup quarter final, and then he's got to nip off to Twickenham on the Sunday and coaches Argentina to beat England. That's just a great story. This World Cup has had lots and lots of stories. So you're absolutely right. You know, you look at some of the emerging nations. Greece's story. People don't know Greece's story about being banned from Greece. So they had to play the qualifiers. And then they, miraculously, when they do qualify the World Cup, they're welcomed back in, which is a surprise. But you actually look at that story. It's just wonderful. And you know, I think the last try in the first game, you know, it was just a cracking try. And suddenly they start becoming people's second favourite teams along with Lebanon. It's just great. It's just great to be part of.
And when it's in France in 3 years, it's going to be Aussie, New Zealand, England, Samoa, Tonga, perhaps Papua New Guinea, you know. So it's going to be a fight to get to the quarterfinals.
Fiji, definitely, yeah.
A lot of pressure on England then to represent the Northern Hemisphere.
Sorry, you talked at some point before about possibly adding a youth tournament in France.
Yeah.
But wasn't there a point where the universities was also going to be part of the...
Yeah, look, COVID hurt us really hard. We were going to have a really big festival of rugby league, whether that would be universities, you'd have armed forces, you'd have blues and twos. And going back in 2013, that's how the Women's World Cup started. It was a festival tournament. We retained the Physical Disability Rugby League World Cup, which England had won, so let's not forget that. It was a great night at Warrington when they beat New Zealand, sorry. So we did want a festival, but the whole dynamic of the tournament changed financially when we had to postpone, because you know there's an additional cost for everybody to carry on for years. So you know we had to focus on what we'd committed to do contractually, and we delivered men, women, wheelchair, physical disability. I would really encourage France to look at the whole festival structure. I'm pretty sure they are doing.
Phil, you talked really about numbers, about what's the profit coming out of the tournament, and then you talked about the government support, I think,
Yeah.
at some point. What was the nature of, not the value, but the nature of the government support?
Well, look at the money we've invested in local communities. Look at actually putting money to pay for people to run the tournament, the flights and everything else. So there's multiple streams of income, but government support was one of them. Let's talk about the rights fee. It's people are using lots of different words. We are committed to paying a rights fee to host the World Cup in this country. You know, the government have helped us, support us to do that, and the IRL own the rights to a World Cup. We were engaged in a bid originally, so you know all of that stuff means you work out a budget. That budget had to be changed when COVID came along.
Hooray for the Northern
You're not
Powers.
getting the Prime Minister to present the cup.
Which one?
My understanding is he's busy in Indonesia at the moment
Just check.
at a G20 summit.
Phil can't wait to boo a politician.
They're getting Matt Hancock back from the jungle to present it.
It was all going so well, George. Any more questions?
I just had a comment really to say thanks for Paul for coming along tonight. It's great to have a very senior person from a Super League club here along tonight, along with us. with the other professionals here, the journalist professionals, but great to have you
Cheers.
here.
Enjoyed it, thank you.
Professional, I've got a laptop, I've got a conference call microphone, there's something I nicked from Radio Yorkshire. Ken Bates paid for that. Right, that's it, we're done. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much to Stockport Library. I'm still not eating this cake, but it's been absolutely superb to be here. Phil, where are we next? Doncaster next week somewhere.
Doncaster week on Thursday. I think we should say that Stockport, one of the original 22 clubs that formed the Northern Union, their role in that is forgotten. It should have been Dewsbury. I think they couldn't make the meeting. There's some great subterfuge about why Dewsbury couldn't get there. At the time, Stockport were big in rugby and came over to Northern Union to make that 27 team. So it feels good to be here to reward them 130 odd years later.
Thank you.
I was going to mention the team that used to play in Stockport, then I realised where they played currently. Thanks for coming, Paul. Best of luck with Salford next year, apart from against Wakefield, I always say. George, enjoy the rest of your time in the country.
Thank you.
And keep sending those hilariously in-depth stories to the magazines. I love reading them. And you know, I feel sycophantic if I say this, Chris, but thank you for the World Cup, because me and Phil have genuinely enjoyed it. I mean, I even paid for tickets for one game, so you know, that's me on my side. But we've enjoyed it. Hopefully it remains successful and you get the final you want and deserve on Saturday. Thanks to the rest of the team there as well.
The team deserve all the credit. As I say earlier, it's been a team effort. We've put in a shift, and we're having a bit of a get together on Sunday to celebrate our achievements. So one or two of us will have a drink for the first time in 5 weeks.
Absolutely. Don't go near any hotel.
Don't worry, we're keeping the location a secret.
We'll have to find some Irish internationals to tell us where the England team are. Thank you very much for coming. Thanks for watching at home, and we'll